felt like I needed to show physical pain in order for my mental pain to be taken seriously, because that is the only time that I received any sort of support. Okay, it's been a very long time since I've filmed anything for YouTube, so I'm just going to apologise in advance if, I don't know, I just seem a bit weird. I just want to start by saying hello. Thank you for being here today with me to celebrate this occasion. My name's Millie and it has been 1 year since I decided to recover from my self-harm addiction. Like with all of the videos that I have made that have been on a sensitive topic, I do just want to include a trigger warning at the start of this video. I am obviously going to be touching on sensitive subjects, and I'm not going to be going into any graphic detail or anything that I think could potentially trigger someone, but I still just think that it is right for me to put out a warning before we start. If you think that any of the topics that could come up in this video could be triggering for you, or if you think that it could actually be detrimental for your recovery rather than helpful, then obviously that is not what I want at all, because I really want this video to be able to help other people who were maybe in the same situation that I was in a year ago. But yeah, just need to put that out there. Please stop watching now if this isn't going to be helpful for you. Before I start talking specifically about my recovery, I thought that I'd give you guys a bit of a backstory on my sort of journey with mental health and when my issues with self-injury started, because it's quite a long history. I think that the first time that I hurt myself intentionally was when I was 12 or 13, but I wouldn't say that it became a problem until I was around 14 and I found myself in a very abusive relationship. That is when I'd say that my maybe existing mental health difficulties really got exacerbated and I really found myself having some issues. As you guys may know, I also suffered from anorexia, which I'm very pleased to say that I am fully recovered from now, and life in terms of food and eating is amazing, and my relationship with that is the best that it's ever been. But at age 14 it really wasn't, and I was struggling massively with an eating disorder. I realise now that both self-harm and restricting my eating were coping mechanisms for dealing with the abuse that I was going through, and past that, dealing with the mental health problems that I'd been left with. So a couple of years ago I was diagnosed with CPTSD. At the time I was really starting to struggle with both eating and self-harm, and this was when the abuse that I was experiencing was at its peak. So looking back on it now, it does kind of make sense that subconsciously I was using both of those strategies to cope, and it was almost keeping me alive, even though obviously those behaviours are very detrimental to your health and do pose risk to your life. I found that the best way for me to look back on them is as sort of the thing that kept me alive during that time, which I guess is ironic. I think it was just before my 15th birthday when the anorexia really sort of picked up its pace and started getting quite bad. And it was around that time that the self-harm sort of levelled out a bit and it didn't continue to get worse. And although it was something that from time to time I still had a problem with, it wasn't until the following year when I really committed to getting better from my eating disorder that it became a problem again. There is quite a high comorbidity rate between self-harm and eating disorders, and if it is like that for you, then it could be because both behaviours are actually there to cover up for something else that's going on, maybe something deeper or something that you're kind of aware of but are just trying not to think about. And I really didn't realise that at the time. I was only 15, I hadn't been experiencing these difficulties with my mental health for very long, I hadn't been talking to anyone about them. And so I really had no idea what was wrong with me and what was going on. So then, unfortunately, when the eating disorder started getting better, this was at the start of 2021, my problems with self-harm did get a lot worse. And it went from being something that I was like able to hide from my family and my friends and sort of pretend wasn't happening, to something that was sort of obvious because it was taking over so much of my life and at times risking my physical health. My family and my friends were aware of it. I would say that this time in my life is when my problems with self-harm really sort of embedded themselves into maybe not what I'd call an addiction just yet, but definitely a dependency. I'm pretty sure I wasn't able to go a day without it. I also ended up being kicked out of school around this time because of my problems with self-harm. They found out that they were bad, and I think it became a sort of safeguarding issue. They weren't comfortable to have me in school when there was obviously a risk of me inflicting damage upon myself. And so literally a couple of weeks after I had tried to return to school after having to have loads of time off my eating disorder, that was it. They were like, no, you can't come back. Unfortunately, I wasn't really able to access any support from CAMS during this time, which are the child and teen mental health services in the UK. I was originally referred to CAMS as an eating disorder patient, so once that started getting better, although it almost felt like my general mental health was actually declining, they basically said, we can't deal with this, this isn't our area of expertise. And yeah, around the time that I got kicked out of school, I also stopped receiving support from CAMS, and honestly it was quite scary, just not having any support at all. It didn't feel like there was anything there to help me get better, and also I sort of lacked the motivation to get better as well. Not having school to go to, being unable to go to dance because of my problems with the self-harm, it really shrinks your world. And I think that actually having things to look forward to and reasons not to hurt myself, that has 100% been the main thing that's helped me with my recovery. My self-harm kind of kept spiralling and kept getting worse, and then I found myself intentionally using restrictive eating to try and manage the self-harm in some sort of strange way, which obviously wasn't a smart idea, because then after months of successful recovery from my eating disorder, I found myself taking steps back just because I thought then it would help me keep the self-harm under control. I describe my problems with it as an addiction because no matter the frequency of it, no matter the severity of it, it never felt like enough. It always felt like I needed to do more and I needed to inflict more pain. And I think that once you get in that mindset, it's a scary place to be, because there's no end to it. You will just keep going and keep taking it further. When you are in that headspace, I don't think you realise that there isn't an end to it. You keep thinking that I'll do this and then it will finally feel like enough. But I promise you it won't. It's never going to feel like enough. No matter how unwell you get with it, your brain is never going to say, okay, now you deserve to get better. You have to decide to recover despite it. The only sort of support that I was receiving around this time was crisis care from the mental health services, from when I'd have to actually seek medical treatment for the self-harm. When I look back on it, it absolutely infuriates me that they'd see someone struggling so much that they were having to go into hospital to receive physical help, and yet they couldn't give me the mental help that I really needed. I think that really ingrained those behaviours into me as well, because I felt like I needed to show physical pain in order for my mental pain to be taken seriously, because that is the only time that I received any sort of support. Before I committed to recovery, I was actually really scared that if I stopped self-harming, then I'd just never get any support again, because no one would be able to understand how much I was suffering and no one would believe me when I said that I needed help. It almost became a way of me communicating my struggles. As my problems with it progressed and got worse and worse, I actually started becoming really scared, mostly of myself and the pain that I knew that I could inflict on myself. It stopped being something that I felt like I had control over. And there were times where I genuinely didn't know whether or not I was going to be able to keep myself safe and alive. it pretty much consumed my whole life. I could barely go a few hours without using it as a coping mechanism, let alone days or weeks, or now here we are and it's been a year. I understand that when it gets like that, it's really difficult to feel like there is an alternative and it's hard to see your life without it. It almost felt like I'd committed so much of myself to this unhealthy coping mechanism that even if I stopped, there wouldn't be any of like me left to return to. I sort of thought, I've already destroyed my body with it. I've already like lost my education. I've already lost my dance. I've already lost the trust of my parents and the ability to wear what I want and do what I want. Like, what's the point of stopping now? I think it was that this fear that I was feeling that initially made me consider the possibility of stopping, or at least trying to manage the illness. It got to the point where I wasn't able to use self-harm without it genuinely compromising my physical health, and that was terrifying. So I managed to sort of slow it down. It became something that I was almost feeling like I was able to control, but I knew that when I did kind of finally give in to those urges, it was terrifying because I didn't know what the consequences were going to be of it. The first few months of attempting to stop, I tried to use external factors to motivate myself to stop. That would be going to dance, going on holiday with my family. That would really help keep me clean for a while. And then after whatever like milestone or goal was keeping me going, as soon as that was done and out of the way, then I would find myself relapsing. It kind of felt like it would be something that I was just going to have to live with for the rest of my life. Before I stopped, I think I did reach a certain awareness of the fact that it wasn't going to be as simple as me just saying, okay, I'm never going to do this again. It isn't like that when a behaviour is so deeply ingrained. I sort of waited until I knew that my eating disorder was in a very good place. I'd managed to completely get back on track with my recovery, and I thought, okay, this is as best time as ever to try and tackle the self-harm, because I felt confident in my ability to keep my eating going well and not sacrifice my anorexia recovery just to get better from the self-harm. Although before I decided to completely stop, I was kind of trying to manage my issues rather than just completely give in to the urges. I had never gotten to a place before where I said to myself, okay, that's it, I'm going to stop, I'm never going to use it again. When something like that is such a big part of your life and there is that neural network in your brain that is telling you do it, do it, do it, coming to the decision of almost giving up on that part of me forever was honestly petrifying. Part of me really didn't want to stop. So June last year, I was in a very good place with my eating. I had recently met my boyfriend and it had been going really well, and he met me after I had made a lot of progress with my recovery. I didn't really identify myself as mentally ill when I was around him. I really wanted to keep it like that. College had been going well, I'd made lots of new friends, and the identity that I'd sort of stuck to myself of being unwell and being someone with an eating disorder or being someone who self-harms, I didn't want that to be me anymore. And it's scary giving up on that identity and that label, especially if you've had it for quite some time. But I realised that I had friends who saw me as so much more than my struggles, and that my mental illness didn't make me who I was. The weather was getting warmer, summer was coming up. Me and my family were going to Wales and to Greece that summer, so I knew I was going to have to control myself until then anyway. I guess I kind of told myself that it was time to move on. The self-harm wasn't actually serving its purpose anymore. If I get rid of this issue as well, then life is only going to get better, it's not going to go backwards. I think it's important not to automatically assume that continuing with this coping mechanism is going to help, even though it's helped you in the past. I can appreciate the fact that it served a purpose for me, but my life had changed a lot since I was 14 and I'd changed as a person. I think deep down a part of me did know that it was time to let that go. Effectively telling myself that I had nothing to lose by trying to stop was the main thing that made me try in the first place. I know I'm going to have to stop for X amount of time because of these holidays that I'm going on, and then I'm just going to try and keep going, and what's the worst that can happen? If it makes my life 10 times worse, not using it as a coping skill, then I can always go back to it. I haven't committed to anything. I haven't told anyone that I'm never going to use it again. I think that if I had told myself that I was never ever going to cut myself again, I think that would have actually made it a lot worse. It would have caused me a lot of anxiety at the time, and it would have made me think about it so much more, and it probably would have increased my urges to do it. After the summer I was still clean, and I kind of thought to myself, yeah, this is going well. Why would I return to my old ways? Like, life is even better now that I've stopped. Yeah, I am having to like actively regulate my emotions instead of immediately resorting to that to sort of cope. The start probably was the hardest, especially after the summer and those sort of reasons to keep going had passed. Once you've got through that initial phase of breaking out of the habit of using self-harm every day or every week, it gets easier to see how you can keep going. I used the I Am Sober app to really help me with my recovery. This video isn't sponsored by them, it's got no link to them, I am just genuinely trying to give you some advice. It allows you to see how long you've been clean for, and there is also a space for you to put little reminders and photos of the reasons why you're trying to recover. And that really helped me, constantly being able to update it on the reasons why I'm trying to stay clean. You know, whether that was for upcoming events or for my friends, for my family, for my boyfriend, for dance. Like, the list now is endless. At the start it almost felt like there was nothing to recover from, but I think that the further you get into your recovery journey, the reason why you want to get better will increase. Now the urge not to self-harm is so much greater than the urge to self-harm. I'm going to answer some more sort of specific questions that you guys were interested in knowing, that you messaged me over on Instagram, because I really just want this video to be as beneficial for you guys as it can be, rather than me just waffling on and on, because that's just boring, really boring, and I can just keep talking for hours. So this will be a really good way to sort of structure this video. Okay, this one is like, I'm just kind of combining some of these questions, so it's a bit general, but around the topic of, does it get easier? Do you still get urges? Was it harder or easier than you thought? Yes, I still do get urges. I'm going to be completely honest about that. And I think that when you're recovering from a maladaptive behaviour like that you've used for so long, it is going to take your brain a while to sort of rewire itself and no longer immediately turn to that when things go wrong. When I do experience particularly triggering situations, my brain does automatically go to that. But now it's a lot easier for me to just tell myself, no, that isn't even an option. It does definitely get easier. The first couple of months were probably the hardest, and then I think you build confidence in yourself. I kept the things that I used to use to harm myself with for those couple of months, and then I just knew in my mind that I wasn't ever going to go back to it. And I got rid of those things. I made sure to get rid of anything that could trigger me, and that kind of obviously helped me even more. Although at the start I did sort of need that safety net and that thing to fall back on. As soon as I managed to get past that initial stage, it just got easier and easier, and I think it will do. I think there will become a time in my life where hopefully my brain won't even resort to thinking like that. I think it's easy to forget how bad it was when you get to this point, and it's easy to feel like, oh, I'm not better, I'm never going to get better, I'm always going to feel like this. But when I look at how I view self-harm now compared to how I did, the difference is absolutely insane. I've had a lot of questions about scars, showing them to people, scars fading, things like that. So I'm just gonna talk about this topic generally. I just want to start by saying that not everyone who self-harms has scars, because not all forms of self-harm are particularly visible and they don't produce scars. And I just want to say that no matter what your body looks like, your struggles with self-injury are completely valid, they're completely real, and they're completely serious, and they're still dangerous, and you still need to get help and support to get better from it. I do have scars on my body. It is difficult because it's like a constant reminder of the things I did to myself. Like, the majority of my body serves as a reminder to me, and apparently to other people, of the struggles that I went through. I've never sort of outwardly struggled with having my scars out in public. I've always kind of kept the fake it till you make it attitude. I think the best thing is to work on self-acceptance. I know that this is my body, I know that my body is always going to have these scars on it, and there's nothing I can do to change that, so I'm not going to compromise the way in which I live my life. Do I get triggered by scars fading? This is an interesting one, because I think that unless you've struggled with self-harming yourself, it's really difficult to understand why scars fading can be triggering. But yeah, I definitely did. I think more so before I decided to recover, and I was still very much engrossed in that sort of being ill identity. How I looked physically is how I learned to communicate my mental pain to people. So before I committed to getting better, I was absolutely terrified that my scars fading and not actively engaging in self-harming behaviours would mean that people would just assume that I was better. Ironically, I've actually received more help since I've been able to stop engaging in these unhealthy coping mechanisms than I did before. I did not realise this at the time, but I've only actually been able to work through some of the trauma that I have since I've no longer been reliant on these external coping mechanisms to keep me safe. When you're actively engaging in things like restrictive eating, self-harm, drug use, they are acting almost like as a shield around the real problems, and you have to work your way through them before you can get to the underlying issues. And I know it probably feels like, well, I can't work through those coping mechanisms because my internal struggles are so bad, but you kind of have to, again, this is easier said than done, but you kind of just have to force yourself. You have to say, I'm going to put in this effort to get better from the self-harm, and then I will be able to receive help for the issues that are making me self-harm. Since my mindset shifted to a recovery one, and one of not wanting to be mentally ill anymore, scars fading haven't really triggered me as much. I started using bio oil on my scars, which does help them fade. If you're someone who does want their scars to fade, I would recommend bio oil, because it does work in turning your scars from that pinky colour to a sort of white, and then from a distance you can't even tell. There's a difference between being ashamed of your scars and not wanting them to be the first thing that people say about you, and I think that was the main thing for me. Some of my scarring was moderately bad, and I didn't want people to immediately judge me on that. I wanted them to be able to see me and meet me as a person before they immediately looked at my arms and came up with misconceptions about who I was. A lot of people ask me about what I used to cope instead once I decided to stop self-harming. I almost didn't replace it with anything. In my opinion, that too can become problematic. You're still then doing the same thing. I really wanted to get to a place where I didn't need a coping mechanism because there wasn't anything for me to cope with. When I decided to stop, it was a really good time in my life to do so, because my sort of baseline happiness was quite high. I had a lot of very good things going on in my life, and that kept me going until I was able to receive the support that I needed to actually work on the underlying trauma and the causes of the self-harm in the first place. And then once I'd worked through that trauma, I didn't feel anymore like I needed a coping mechanism for it. Obviously this is all hypothetical, because it isn't possible for everyone to receive the help that they need for the underlying causes, and I've been very lucky in the support that I have received recently for the trauma. But I think that in an ideal world, you won't be replacing the self-harm with anything. Do I regret using self-harm? Seems like quite a simple question, like it should have a yes or no answer. Yeah, to some extent, of course I do. I regret the amount of time and the amount of energy that I wasted on hurting my body. I regret creating these neural pathways that when something goes wrong now, my brain automatically says, hurt yourself. I regret the physical damage that I've done to myself, and I'm not going to try and sugarcoat this whole part of my life. Yeah, I can look back on these past few years and say it has shaped me as a person, but it doesn't mean that if I had the choice I would go through it all again. I do think though that it is important to recognise that your past struggles do shape who you are as a person, and I think especially recovering from mental health problems, it does give you a certain empathy and kindness towards other people, and it does increase your determination and your resilience and your sense of willpower. Definitely all of those things are qualities, but at the end of the day I would say that the destruction that self-harm addiction has caused definitely outweighs those qualities. The harm that I've inflicted on myself physically and mentally, and the harm that I've inflicted on those around me, I don't think that it can like justify that amount of pain. This kind of leads on to the question of what advice would you give your 14-year-old self? The advice I'd give is don't even start, like literally don't even go there. Even though hurting yourself, it might seem like a quick fix and an easy escape now, in 3 years' time it isn't going to feel like that anymore. I would say to anyone who is considering using self-harm or has recently started using it as a way to cope, reach out for help straight away. Don't let it get bad. Don't convince yourself that it isn't bad enough yet to get help, because allowing my issues to get to the point that they did, it nearly cost me my life. And I didn't see that at the time because of how unwell I was. Self-harm can so quickly go from being something that you do secretly to try and manage your emotions to being something that does pose such an extreme physical risk. I also got some questions around the topic of being triggered by other people and how to help other people who are going through similar things. I'm not going to lie, being triggered by others was a massive thing that stopped me from getting better for quite a long time. That is sort of the nature of disorders like this. In recovery, I found that kind of distancing myself from any sort of conversation that involved active self-harm was the best option for me. Being around people who were also actively recovering, that was the best thing ever. Being alongside other people who were doing it as well and seeing that they were able to get better made me think, like, yeah, it is possible. Obviously there is a risk with that of them relapsing and it affecting you, but you just have to remember that you're on your own journey and no one else's choices have the power to change that or affect that. In terms of helping people, I think it is important to help yourself before you can help other people. You can be there for someone, you can give them any advice that you have, but I think that you do need to make sure that you keep a certain distance between it. You don't want their struggles to be triggering you. I also received a question of how to help someone who doesn't want to help, and short answer is you can't. With recovery from any addiction, it has to come from yourself, and no matter what anyone else does to help you, to support you, to actually physically put things in place to stop you from being able to engage in whatever you're addicted to, it isn't going to change unless that individual decides that it's going to. And I think that it's very easy to give so much time and so much energy into helping someone else, but until they come to you and they say, I really want to stop, there isn't much that you can do. And I know that that is really difficult and it's a hard thing to accept, but it's the truth of it. And if you have issues yourself, you can't be putting all your energy into someone else's recovery. You need to be focusing it on yours, and then you'll find that you will be in a better place to support them. I kind of talked about this already, but I had a lot of questions asking about, did it ever feel like it wasn't bad enough, or like you needed to reach XYZ milestone? Yeah, definitely, and that's what kept me engaged in it for so long. Ironically, it was also what stopped me, and it is what stops me now. That fear of giving control back over to that part of my brain that just wants to hurt myself. If I hadn't intervened, then self-harm probably would have been the thing that killed me, and probably unintentionally. You get so absorbed in it that you don't even realise that what you're doing is actually really dangerous, and it's very easy to look at the injury that you've inflicted on yourself and say, oh, it's not that bad, it's not bad enough. But it is, and a lot of the time, even if you don't think that you need medical help, you probably do, and it is really, really important for you to seek that help. A big catalyst for my stopping was an injury that, if I hadn't received help for, probably would have killed me. And at the time I wasn't actually going to seek help for it. I genuinely believed that it wasn't that bad, and it took me hours before I decided that it probably was bad and I probably did need help for it. And I think that really did put things into perspective for me. After having survived it and realising that so easily that day it could have been the end, made me think that, hang on, this addiction is actually maybe a lot more serious than I realised and that other people realised. After that event, I was definitely a lot more scared of my own brain. It definitely helped me realise that self-harm isn't just something that's keeping me alive, because it was getting to the point where it potentially wasn't going to keep me alive at all. It was going to do the exact opposite. It was then that I realised that I did need to take back some control over it, and that I couldn't just continue with that addiction for the rest of my life, because it wasn't going to get any better. It was only going to get worse. When I do get urges now, the best thing that I do to cope is distract myself until they pass. And I know that this is something that everyone says, but I didn't really believe it until I actually tried it. I've gotten a lot better at being able to tell someone when I am feeling really shit. It will usually be my boyfriend. Even if it takes me a while to admit to it, I am able to say every time when I'm feeling a bit rubbish. And then I will do something to distract myself, whether that's playing Hay Day on my phone. I absolutely love that game. That farm and all my little animals kept me alive. Not lying. Watching something on TV, doing some colouring in, doing a Sudoku, something like that that doesn't involve much brain power but is able to distract myself until I can kind of sleep it off, is definitely the best thing. My mum always used to say this to me, but sleep is one of the biggest healers, and I do still believe that. At night is often when, if I am going to get urges, when they're worse. So I find that doing something like that just to calm me down and distract me enough so I can get some sleep is the best thing, because things often do feel different in the morning, and if they don't, then you're in a better place to be able to talk to someone about it and reach out for some help. Finally, I just want to put this message out there for anyone who is wanting to recover but is struggling to. It is possible, even if you've tried 100 times before and it hasn't worked. Even if you have been struggling with self-harm for most of your life, it is possible to get better, and life without self-harm in it is so much better. So much better. Even tiny things that you wouldn't really appreciate could get better when you're not actively engaging in a self-harm addiction are just made so much better and so much easier. I think it's very easy to tell yourself that you're never gonna self-harm again, and then when you relapse, feel so disheartened that you then end up spiralling back to where you were. But you need to remember that lapses are a part of recovery, and what makes it a relapse is having one incident and then taking that as a sign to go back to how you were. If you're able to suffer with it once and then move past it and keep going, then that is actually going to benefit your recovery. So my advice would just be, don't give up, even if it feels like you're not getting anywhere. In a year's time, you'll look back on where you are now and you'll think, wow, I have actually made a lot of progress and I have come a long way. It's just in the moment it can be quite difficult to reflect on that and realise all the progress that you have made, especially if you find it hard to give yourself a compliment or give yourself a break and be kind to yourself. Just really try and look back on the progress that you have made and give yourself a pat on the back and say that you're proud of yourself. I want this video to be a sign to anyone who's considering trying to get better from self-harm to just go for it, because what is the worst that can happen? You relapse and you find that you at the moment need to continue using it, but at least you've tried. The part of your brain that's telling you that you need self-harm and that without it the whole world is going to end is the bit that keeps you engaged in that coping mechanism. And the sooner that you can tell yourself, no, I don't need it, the sooner you're going to be able to get better. I really hope that you guys can give recovery a try, and then in a year's time we can celebrate together and we can recover together, because it will be worth it, I promise you. I want to say thank you so much for listening to me waffle on today. I hope that some of you have found it helpful and it hasn't been too boring. If you guys have any other questions or any suggestions for videos that you'd like to see from me, you can just put it in the comments and I promise I will reply. I think that's about it. I hope you're all being kind to yourselves, you're all looking after yourselves. I love you all so much, and I just want to say thank you for all your support, because it means the absolute world to me and I couldn't have got better without you guys. So thank you. Goodbye.